Good morning, class. Our lesson for today is African literature. But first, let me tell you some facts about this country. Okay, let me tell you that Africa is the second largest continent in the world. Africa consists of 54 countries and about 1.1 billion people live in this continent. Amazing, isn't it? In this continent, there are about 3,000 tribes and about 2,000 different languages are used. Africa is considered as the cradle of humankind. Why? Because the first hominids, human beings, and the relatives of gorillas, chimpanzees, and other earliest human forms were found at the southern part of Africa. Africa is much more diverse than we all think. We all know that the culture and history of Africa is very rich, to which we will learn about its literature. Specifically, we will learn how they compose their literature and what influences them to write their kind and their own unique literature.
What?
Africa consists of
What?
54 countries and about 1.1 billion
What?
people. Oops. Our time is already done, so I hope you learned a little bit. Next time, we'll be discussing more about African literature. So I think class dismissed, except for those three at the back. Since you guys are very busy doing your personal business at the back and not listening to me, you have a task. Your task is to evaluate this book that I will be giving you and discuss or analyze the different characteristics of this literature. To be specific, you have to dissect this book and explain it to your classmates so they can understand how different and unique the African literature is. Do you understand?
Oh, I should have listened to her.
Yeah, I'm eating just fine at the back.
You both really need some changes. What?
Yeah, at least we don't daydream of fictional characters in the middle of the day.
Anyways, let's go home.
Now, let's check the book.
What's wrong?
It doesn't open.
There's a rule written here. To unleash the story, one must know the truth of its history.
What's with this clothing? Whoa.
Wow, we're on Africa.
The development of African literature, from its oral tradition to its current trends, reflects the history of its people, the continent's feeling as a whole, especially the minds of its population. African literature is influenced by many things. Number one is local traditions. Number two is European colonialism. Number three is the impacts of Islamic and Arab worlds. And lastly, Christianity or religious beliefs. There are various languages used in writing literary works of Africa. Number 1 is English, number 2 is French, number 3 is Portuguese, and lastly are the 40 distinctive African languages. African literature portrays many things, but the most commonly ones included are: number 1 is the modern social and political realities. Number 2, it examines both African and non-African value systems. And lastly, they base themselves on traditional or indigenous traditions and distinctly African views. And African literature can be conveyed in many forms: theater, riddles, proverbs, allegories, and many more.
Now, let's talk about the different kinds of their oral tradition. Number 1. Prose narratives. It consists of myths, legends, folktales, anecdotes, and jokes. Myth. Critics have recognized the value of African literature's representation of mythic and folklore. Myth, which is deeply, intensely emotional, has to do with gods and creation, with the essence of belief system. This picture is Yoruba African Orishas, or their gods and goddesses. Folktales, featuring animal trickster like tortoise, hare, rabbit, chevrotain or spider, human, and divine tricksters like kings, commoners, twins, hunters, ogres, and the little people. It is usually being told at night during the dry season, and the interplay between narrator and audience has a highly dramatic value, and it should have done by a skilled actor. This is an example of African folktale entitled Why Mosquito Buzz in People's Ear by Berna Aguera. Proverbs. To give and add color to the conversation, and their skillful use is a mark of erudition and elegance of speech in African societies. In short, witty or ironic statements, metaphorical in its formulation, which aim to communicate a response to a particular situation, to offer advice, or to be persuaded. One example of African proverb is, "You're beautiful, but learn to work, for you cannot eat your beauty." Praise poems are epithets or nicknames called out in reference to an object, a person, a town, an animal, a disease, and so on, in celebration of its outstanding qualities and achievements. Professional groups often create poems exclusive to them. Prominent chiefs might appoint a professional performer to compile their praise poems and perform them on special occasions. It is one of the examples of African praise poem. A treasury of South African poetry and verse entitled the Boer Loopers. Epics. Epics are elaborate literary forms usually performed only by experts on special occasions. They often recount the heroic exploits of ancestors. This entitled Bayajiga, an example of West African epic. Dirges, chanted during funeral ceremonies, lament the departed, praise his or her memory, and ask for his or her protection. Riddles. They are couched in the form of statement rather than a question, and the connection between query and reply can be subtle and require deep understanding of the cultural matrix for comprehension. One example of riddle from Africa is, what do you look at with one eye but never with two? Have you ever heard the word negritude? Well, negritude means blackness. It was a black literary and cultural movement that spanned in the year 1930s to 1950s. The movement began among the French-speaking writers from the Africa and the Caribbean. The leading figure in the negritude was Léopold Sédar Senghor. He was a Senegalese poet, politician, and cultural theorist that serves as the first president of Senegal for 2 decades. The origins of negritude can be traced from the shared experiences of Africans who suffered slavery and colonialism. So now, let me give you 4 basic ideas behind negritude. First, Africans must look to their own cultural heritage to determine the values and traditions that are useful in the modern world. Second, committed writers should use African subject matters and poetic traditions and should excite a desire for political freedom. Third, negritude itself encompasses the whole African culture, economic, social, and political values. Fourth, the value and dignity of African traditions and peoples must be asserted.
The written literatures in Africa. A problem concerns the small relationship for Africa, literatures in Africa. Plus, 50% of Africa population is illiterate and hence many Africans cannot access written literatures. The written literatures, novels, plays, and poems in the 1950s and 60s have been described as literatures of testimony. And African authors who produced literate in European language have been described as literatures of revolt. Written literature in Africa. There are 3 waves of literacy in Africa. 1 is Utopia, 2 is Africa, and number 3 is Europe. Utopia, where written works have been discovered that appeared before the earliest literatures in the Celtic and Germanic language of Western Europe. Africa, with the spread of Islam, soon after the emergence of Islam in the 7th century, and believers established themselves in North Africa through a series of jihads or holy wars. And number 3, Europe. Through trade relationship, missionary activities, and colonialism, repropered the 3rd wave of literacy in Africa. The writer of Africa in written literature. Antar or Antara, son of Sadat al-Absi, an Afro-Arab warrior poet who died in 615. Sirat Antara, the Antar romance epic masterpiece. Antaris means of Antaria style of writing. Abdullah son al-Jan, a black poet, died in 777. Wrote a witty verse for the Abbasid court in Baghdad. Syriac Abdul Has Ali, son of Nafi, an Afro-Persian known as the Black Nightingale, who went in 822 to Spain, where he made an enormous contribution to the evolution of Andalusian poetry, music, and singing. Other displaced African writers. Juan Latino, born in Guinea, wrote Latin. Alfonso Alvarez, the first to write in a European language, in Portuguese. In written literature in Africa. The interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Aquino, or Gustavus Bessa the African, in 1789, described his boyhood in Nigeria, his kidnapping, his life as a slave in the American South and the Caribbean, and ultimately his life as a freedman in England. The written literature in 20th century pioneers. Thomas Mafolo in South Africa has an international recognition achievement. He has 3 fiction in Southern Soto. One is Mauti Owa Butchabella, or Traveler to the East. 2 is Fitsing, or To the Path. And number 3, Chaka, another 20th century pioneers. Jean-Joseph Rabello Rebello in Madagascar wrote about tragic example of the impact of colonialism on a sensitive imagination. He self-taught in a French language and 4 volumes of his works, Salves, volumes, Presque Songes, and Traduit de la Nuit. Another in 20th century pioneers, Shaban Robert, in Tanzania, first Swahili African writer to write in a variety of genres. Advocate as Swahili as their principal language, no higher education, and last of written literature of Africa in 20th century pioneers, Olorunfemi Fagunwa in Nigeria, wrote modern prose fiction in Yoruba in 1938. Ogbohu Ode Nino Igbo Irunmale, The Forest of a Thousand Demons, recount on his adventures in a thick forest.
To further understand African literature, we will study a literary work entitled Everyday Use by Alice Walker in 1973. Alice Walker is a famous American poet and author who's famous for her works about race and gender.
Everyday Use has the following main themes: race, family inheritance, ownership, traditions, and rural versus urban Black identity.
The characters in the story of Everyday Use: Mama, Maggie, Dee, Hakim a barber. Mama, the narrator of the story. Mama describes herself as a big boned woman with hands that are rough from years of physical labor. She wears overalls and has been both mother and father to her 2 daughters. Poor and uneducated, she was not given the opportunity to break out of her rural life. A loving mother, her frank, open nature prevents her from diluting herself when it comes to her daughters' weaknesses. Mama has a strong understanding of her heritage and won't allow Dee to take the family quote. Maggie, the shy, retiring daughter who lives with Mama, burned in a house fires. As a young girl, Maggie lacks confidence and shuffles when she walks, often fleeing or hanging in the background when there are other people around. Unable to make eye contact, she is a good-hearted, kind, and dutiful. Rather than anger her intimidating sister, she is willing to let Dee have the quads that had originally been promised to her. Dee, Mama's older daughter, who has renamed herself Wanghero Liwanika Kemanho. Dee wears a brightly colored yellow and orange ankle-length dress that is inappropriate for the warm weather. Her hair stands up straight on top and is bordered by 2 long pigtails that hang down in back. Dee is educated, worldly, and deeply determined, not generally allowing her desire to be right when Mama won't let her have the quads to display. She becomes furious. She claims that Mama and Maggie don't understand their heritage, but she is the one overlooking the important aspect of her family history. Hakim a barber, this boyfriend or possible husband. Hakim a barber is a black Muslim whom Mama humorously refers to as Assalamu alaikum, the Arab greeting that offers them, meaning peace be with you, an English presence. He is the short and stocky with waist-length hair and a long, bushy beard. His desire to make a good first impression makes him seem awkward. He makes Maggie uncomfortable by forcing his attention and greeting on her. The setting of the short story. The events in the short story take place in the state of Georgia. This is indicated by the fact that Dee goes to school in Augusta, which is a city in the state of Georgia. Alice Walker herself was born in a rural town in Georgia and attended school in a time when schools were segregated, so readers can imagine that everyday use is inspired by the writer's own experiences. The main physical setting is Mama's yard, which she describes in the first paragraph. The yard is central to the character's way of life. Mama and Maggie live in a rural area, and their lifestyle is modest. Their house does not have windows but holes in the walls, like the portholes in a ship, but not round and not square, with rawhide holding shutters up on the outside.
Everyday Use by Alice Walker, Plot Overview. Mama decides that she will wait in the yard for her daughter Dee's arrival. Mama knows that her other daughter, Maggie, will be nervous throughout Dee's stay, self-conscious of her scars and burn marks, and jealous of this much easier life. Back then, Mama believed that Dee hated Maggie until Mama and community raised enough money to send Dee to school in Augusta. Mama resented the intimidating world of ideas and education that Dee forced on her family on her trips home. Mama never went to school beyond second grade. Maggie can read only in a limited capacity. Mama looks forward to Maggie's marriage to John Thomas, after which Mama can peacefully relax and sing hymns at home. When Dee arrives, Mama grips Maggie to prevent her from running back into the house. Dee emerges from the car with her boyfriend, Hakim Abarber. Mama disapproves of strange man's presence and is equally disapproving of Dee's dress and appearance. Hakim Abarber greets and tries to hug Maggie, who recoils. Dee gets a camera from the car and takes a few pictures of Mama and Maggie in front of their house.
Smile, Mama.
Smile.
And you too, Maggie. Get closer in together. Maggie, give us another expression. And I want another one with the house behind. Okay. Yes, that's good. And another.
Oh,
Oh, it's good. Oh, I guess that's enough.
Then she puts the camera on the backseat and kisses Mama on forehead. As Hakim Abarber awkwardly tries to shake Maggie's hand, Dee tells her mother that she has changed her name to Wangero Liwanika Kemanho.
No, Mama, not D. Wangero Liwanika Kemanjo.
he was
To
named after
protest
Aunt
being
Dee.
named after the people
And
who have
Daisy.
oppressed her.
And
Mama
Daisy, yes,
tells
but
Dee
who was she
that she
named
was in
after?
fact named
After
after
Grandma
her
Dee.
Aunt Daisy,
And who
who was
was she
named
named
after Grandma Dee,
After her
who
mother,
bore
not
the
back
name
far
of
back
her
as I
mother
can trace.
as well. Dee says she doesn't have to use a new name, but Mama learns
So
to
why should I
say
trace
it,
it back any farther
although
than that?
she is
I
unable to
forgot to
master
introduce
Hakim's
you.
name.
Mama, Maggie.
Assalamu alaikum. Raising cattle ain't my style, but you can call me Hakim Abarber.
A what?
Hakim Abarber.
A barber. How do you say your name, baby?
Wangero.
Wanjiro?
Wangero.
Uh-huh.
It's a little awkward at first.
I see. Well, welcome to our house, Mr. Barber.
Dee approaches the butter churn in the corner and asks Mama if she can have it stopped, which had been carved by Uncle Buddy. Dee wants the dusher too, a device with blades used to make butter. Hakim Abarber asks if Uncle Buddy whittled the dash as well. to which Maggie replies that it was Aunt Dee's first husband Stash who made it. Dee praises Maggie's memory and drops the items. Mama grips the handle of the dasher, examining the roots and worn areas made by her relative's hands. Dee ransacks the trunk at the foot of Mama's bed, reappearing with two quilts made by her mother, aunt and grandmother. The quilts contain small pieces of garments worn by relatives all the way back to the Civil War. Dee asks her mother for the quilts. Mama hears Maggie drop something in the kitchen and then slam the door. Mama suggests that Dee take other quilts, but Dee insists, wanting the ones hand-stitched by her grandmother. Mama gets up and tries to tell Dee more about the garments used to make the quilts, but Dee steps out of reach. Mama reveals that she had promised Maggie the quilts. Dee gasps, arguing that Maggie won't appreciate the quilts and isn't smart enough to preserve them. But Mama hopes that Maggie does, indeed, designate the quilts for everyday use. Dee says that the priceless quilts will be destroyed. Mama says that Maggie knows how to quilt and can make more. Maggie shuffles and tries to make peace, offers Dee the quilts. When Mama looks at Maggie, she is struck by a strange feeling similar to the spirit she feels sometimes in church. Impulsively, she hugs Maggie, pulls her into the room, snatches the quilts out of Dee's hands, and places them in Maggie's lap. As Dee and Hakim Abarbar leave, Dee informs Mama that Mama does not understand her own heritage. Kissing Maggie, Dee tells her to try and improve herself because that's the new day for Black Americans. Mama and Maggie watch the car drive off, then sit in the quiet yard until bedtime.
You just don't understand.
Understand what?
Your heritage. And Maggie, you ought to do something with yourself too. It's a new day for us. But from the way you and Mama still live, you'd never know it.
Now let's discuss that this whole story is about having different opinions towards one heritage. Mama and Maggie's view of their heritage is completely unquestionable. Mama and Maggie values their ancestral beliefs and traditions very well. They know the purpose, they know the meaning, and they know how to value it properly. While Dee is despising her own heritage, and she just wanted to expand her own heritage and culture and take them back to the city. She is being a hypocrite. The story tells that Dee is a hypocrite person. Despite saying that she values her own heritage, she doesn't even know the real meaning and the real value of those objects. Let's talk about Dee. Dee's behavior in this whole story is affected by various factors. Number one is education. We all know that she moved out of the countryside to pursue studies. Being exposed to a new environment, she became a stranger to her own family. She adapted what her peers are doing, what kind of lifestyle they are living. That is why when she came back home, she became a completely different person. Now, setting that aside, education has a big impact in our lives, not only for Dee, but also for our lives. Being able and having the ability and capability to learn is a privilege. but we should know what we should learn than what we should not. Now, another factor for this change of behavior is the cultural or culture background. Why? One's culture background can be easily changed if she was exposed in another environment, especially when she has a weak relationship with her own ancestral family or blood relatives. In the story, it was mentioned that they have a strained relationship. Now that she have a weaker relationship, she is more likely to adopt what she learned on herself more than what is taught to her by her own family. Now, another thing, aside from culture and education, is sociology. Like I have mentioned before, if you meet new people, because different people have different mindsets, different people have different views in life. Once you learn them, you adapt to them, you became a completely different person. And being a completely different person takes you away from your own family, making you a stranger. That is why Z doesn't value or doesn't understand her own history despite being self-aware. Now, what is the moral for this story? The moral for this story is to have a good relationship with your family. Family is very important because this is the basic unit of a community. This is where you learn new and first basic things before entering a society. Without your family, who are you today? The second moral of this story is if you don't know something completely or you don't understand it very well, you shouldn't be boasting or you shouldn't be expressing something that is inappropriate. You have to ignore something that you never understood or you have a shallow understanding. Next, what is the purpose of having education? Yeah, the education is a very important thing. You learn, so you became a radical person. But you should control everything that you put into yourself. Because if you change into a very complete person, maybe it may cause you to be estranged from your family. As a recap, we can say that the story involves African literature. Why? The African literature involves values. They instill values on their stories in order to educate young people. Number 2, they instill values and beliefs. They include taboos or any rules and traditions in their story to preserve the tradition or cultural heritage. And then, it is also to impose and provide psychological release. As you can see, the author releases her psychological emotions in her story. She says that people should value their lives, should value their beliefs, because if they don't, they will live a hard life. Lastly, this story can be found on the internet. If you don't understand or you need more information to understand the story, you can search it by the title Everyday Use by Alice Walker. I hope that you understand today's lesson very well, and I hope that you learned something from us today. We should all be looking back at our past in order to move forward to the future. This is Mariel Romualdo.
I'm Cassandra Iniz A. de los Santos.
I'm Grisel N. Manapan.
And we are the Group 7